Hey guys, welcome to Beyond Civilization. Today we're going deep into the woods of northeastern Texas to explore the overgrown ruins of a military camp that was used to train American soldiers and house German POWs during World War II. We'll also be searching for the whereabouts of two abandoned World War II tanks rumored to be lost in these woods, as well as covering the story of two German prisoners who escaped from this very camp nearly 80 years ago and led authorities on a nearly 100-mile chase throughout East Texas. Camp Fannin was a U.S. Army Infantry Training Center and POW camp located near Tyler, Texas. It was opened in May of 1943 and closed around 1946. The 14,000-acre facility stretched from around the current location of University of Texas at Tyler Health Science Center all the way to Winona, Texas. This installation managed to train somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 U.S. soldiers during its existence, at one point training as many as 40,000 at one given time. The camp trained men to fight on both fronts of the war, Europe and the Pacific, and some would even go on to help secure the beaches of Normandy during D-Day. Today, we're going to be looking for some of the original building ruins of Camp Fannin. Thanks to an old map that we found, we have a decent idea of which buildings were placed where, and some of the buildings that we're visiting today may possibly include an infirmary, a school, a recreation building, a theater, the HQ building, and a chapel. Although I won't reveal our exact locations visited to protect these amazing historical relics from vandalism and destruction. This is concrete. According to our map, this is the approximate site of the ruins of one of Camp Fannin's chapels. Interestingly enough, during the war, many American prison camps tried to maintain a regular Sunday chapel program for Catholics and Protestants, although because of language difficulties and boycotts by the Nazis in the POW population, attendance was disappointingly low. Given the location of its ruins, this particular chapel would most likely have served American trainees, and not German POWs. Regardless of who it served, however, its crumbling ruins are still a lost historical treasure that dates back roughly 80 years. Needless to say, a lot went on here while this place was in operation. In fact, about 78 years ago, in May of 1945, two German prisoners escaped from this very camp. It all started when prisoners Joseph Rondorf and Ignaz Luke broke out of the facility and headed southeast, towards Louisiana. It's hard to tell for sure what they had in mind, but their eventual destination may have been Mexico. After a roughly 90-mile journey, they eventually reached the Sabine River near Haslam, Texas. They may have been wondering what to do next at that point, but soon they found their answer. An unattended skiff on the river provided them with the perfect getaway vehicle. With the Sabine River providing a virtual freeway straight down to the Gulf of Mexico, the possibilities could have been endless if they made it that far. They could try to flee for Mexico, or perhaps with some luck, somehow get spotted and rescued by a wandering German U-boat, some of which would occasionally sneak around the Texas coast looking for targets. However, their luck ran out, and on May 23, 1945, Rondorf and Luke were recaptured shortly after stealing the skiff. They were found guilty of violating Article of War 96 and sentenced to 8 years of hard labor at the Southern Branch Disciplinary Barracks at Camp Hood, Texas. Today, numerous abandoned buildings, foundations, artifacts, and even vehicles continue to be occasionally discovered at the site of Camp Fannin. For example, the concrete base of Camp Fannin's 100,000-gallon water tank is still relatively intact. Yeah, so this tower was built for the firefighters of Camp Fannin, just in case they needed to put out a fire. They had a ready supply of water available. It would have been even taller during its days in operation because it had another wooden extension mounted on top of the concrete tower base that's remaining. But the wooden extension has since fallen down, and this is all that's left. Here are some of the remains of the wooden top of the tower before it collapsed. Here is the machinery building, or what's left of it. This building was used to store machinery. Now it's full of trash. Additionally, in 1987, the abandoned remains of two M3 Lee battle tanks are said to have been discovered deep in the woods right here, on the grounds of the former training camp. Their story is amazing, complete with its own triumphs, tragedy, and mystery. You see, according to the very limited historical records in existence on the subject, these tanks were discovered in 1987 and quote-unquote lost again in 1991. But how? How is it even possible to lose two priceless 30-ton historical relics that are nearly a century old? When I learned about this mystery, I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. After months of grueling research, interviewing potential witnesses, digging up archives, and some unexpected help, the answers to the mystery began to trickle in. This is the story of Camp Fannin's lost tanks. The tanks were supposedly stumbled upon in 1987 in the woods on the grounds of the former training camp. There are precious few details online about the discovery of these tanks, and no one, not even the personnel at the local museum or library, seemed to know where exactly the tanks were discovered or what had become of them afterwards. I decided to make an appointment to view some old video archives at the University of Texas at Tyler Health Science Center Library to try to acquire whatever precious little information was available, as there are currently no digital copies available online of these old VCR videos. Here's the footage.
Today, workers began digging out what are apparently two World War II tank chassis used at the old Camp Fannin installation. One of the tanks uncovered had 4 trees growing through it. The other had been stripped of its turnstile and almost completely buried. The story has it that one of the Grant tanks became stuck in the mud during training exercise. The other tried to pull it out but also became stuck. The Army stripped them down and then abandoned them. The tanks, though missing some parts, are in pretty good shape. Even the old rubber tires were intact on one of the machines. There have been relics found from Camp Fannin in the past, but perhaps this may be the largest discovery ever found. Clint Yates, East Texas News.
According to records, the tanks were discovered in 1987. After months of digging up old archives and interviewing people, I am determined to find some answers, so we're heading into the woods. Where exactly was it that these vintage World War II tanks were located? And are they still sitting there, or have they been recovered and possibly restored somewhere? Despite all my research, I only have a vague idea of the location where the tanks may have been discovered, so I realize that finding the site is a long shot. Amazingly, however, I do indeed find it, or at least so I believe. I'm no tank expert, but in my modest opinion, this hole seems to match the size and shape of an M3 Lee, and there are signs of an old excavation here. I'm reasonably confident that this has a good chance of being the site where the tanks were discovered at Camp Fannin in 1987. So that solves part of the mystery, but obviously we can also see that the tanks are no longer there, so now we're still left with the most important question. What in the world happened to the tanks? How were they lost in 1991, as indicated by historical records? I was about to give up on that portion of the mystery, but just weeks before the completion of this documentary, help came from an unexpected source. Tom Craig, the retired director of the library at the University of Texas at Tyler Health Science Center, reached out to me and offered to assist me with any questions that I may have about Camp Fannin. I was astounded. Apparently, a colleague informed him that I had been looking for him earlier in search of answers, and despite being comfortably retired, he still made the effort to come forward and make himself available. Tom revealed that when the overgrown, decaying tanks were finally discovered on what was back then the property of Triton Energy, the turrets had indeed been removed from both tanks, just as indicated by the records. One was in much worse shape than the other, but even the relatively better preserved one was missing the side door, tracks, and some of the wheels. Nonetheless, many people were still thrilled at the discovery, and the tank that was in the best shape out of the two was painted, restored, and eventually placed on display at the Triton HQ. So far so good. But then what happened to the restored tank and its less fortunate companion in 1991? How exactly were they lost? Tom reveals that Triton pulled out of the area several years ago. Unfortunately, when Triton left, the display tank at Triton HQ mysteriously disappeared as well. Indeed, Tom had previously done some research of his own to try to find out what happened to the tanks, and very sadly, one source stated to Mr. Craig that he had personally witnessed the historical tank being cut up for scrap metal. This is truly a dagger to the heart of anyone who loves and appreciates Texas and American history. A bittersweet resolution to the mystery that I had been investigating. The legacy of Camp Fannin, however, can never be forgotten. The camp continued to operate and train soldiers until the end of the war. Nearly 3 years after it opened, in 1946, Camp Fannin stopped military training, although it remained in operation as a center for returning soldiers for a short while longer. As the years have progressed, portions of the camp have either been demolished or constructed over, while others were simply abandoned in the forest, eventually being reclaimed by nature and lost to time. So what other World War II secrets lay hidden in this dark, secluded forest? It's possible that only time may tell. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you on my next adventure.